Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store immediately. The manager's voice cut through the Saturday afternoon buzz of Riverside luxury electronics like a knife through silk. 50 customers, maybe more, turned their heads toward the commotion near the flagship display of the newest smartphones. Lily Chun stood frozen, her hand still hovering over the $1,200 device she'd been examining. She was 28 years old, and in that moment, she felt every eye in the store burning into her back. "Excuse me?" she said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat rushing to her face. Rick Thornton, the store manager, crossed his arms over his chest. He was in his early 40s, with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. His name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights, proudly displaying Store Manager 12 Years of Excellence. "You heard me. This is a premium establishment. We cater to a certain clientele and frankly..." He paused, looking her up and down with barely concealed disgust. "You don't fit the profile." A mother with 2 children stared openly. A teenage couple whispered to each other. An elderly man in an expensive suit shook his head but said nothing. The store's background music, some generic pop song about dreams coming true, felt obscenely cheerful against the moment's cruelty. Lily had walked into Riverside Luxury Electronics that afternoon with one simple goal: buy a new phone to replace her cracked one. She'd saved for 3 months, working double shifts at the community center where she taught art to underprivileged kids. Every dollar had been carefully set aside. She'd even brought cash because she'd heard they offered a small discount for cash payments on high-end items. But apparently, saving money and paying in cash made you look suspicious. "I have money," Lily said, her voice still calm but with an edge now. "I was going to purchase this phone." Rick laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Sure you were. Look, I've been in retail for 12 years. I know your type. You come in, handle the expensive merchandise with your..." He glanced at her hands. "Your unwashed hands. Take photos to brag to your friends. Maybe even try to steal something. I've seen it 100 times." Lily's hands weren't unwashed. She'd scrubbed them thoroughly before leaving home, the way she always did. But she'd been painting that morning, teaching a class to kids from the neighborhood, and there were still faint traces of blue acrylic under her nails that soap couldn't quite remove. "My hands are clean," she said, and something in her tone made a few nearby customers look uncomfortable. "That's what they all say." Rick turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers performing now. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. Here at Riverside Luxury Electronics, we maintain the highest standards. Sometimes that means protecting our legitimate customers from individuals who don't belong here." The words hit like slaps. Individuals who don't belong here. What Rick didn't know, what he couldn't see past his prejudice and arrogance, was that Lily had been coming to this store for 2 years. Not to buy anything because she'd been saving carefully, but to research products, to understand what she'd eventually purchase. She'd always been treated with polite indifference by other staff members. Never great, but never hostile. Rick was new. He'd started managing this location 3 months ago, and Lily had heard whispers from the younger staff members about his attitudes, his comments, his habit of profiling customers based on appearance. She'd just never experienced it directly until now. "I'd like to speak to the owner," Lily said, pulling out her phone to check something. Rick's smile widened, predatory. "The owner? You think David Chun gives his personal time to people like you? He built this chain from nothing, 12 stores across the state, and he didn't do it by wasting time on complaints from people who can't afford to shop here anyway." Lily's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something that made the elderly man in the expensive suit lean forward slightly, suddenly more interested. "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave," Rick continued, his voice rising. "Or I'll call security. Actually, you know what? I'm calling them now. We can't be too careful these days." He pulled out his radio, making a show of it, ensuring everyone saw him taking action against the threat. And Lily stood there, watching him, her hands steady at her sides, her breathing calm and controlled. She looked like someone who'd been through storms before, and learned that panic never helped. She looked like someone who'd been underestimated her entire life and had stopped being surprised by it. But she also looked like someone who knew something Rick didn't. Before you do that, Lily said quietly, I should probably mention something. I don't care what you have to mention, Rick snapped. Security is on their way. My last name, Lily continued, as if he hadn't spoken, is Chun? Same as the owner you just mentioned, David Chun. Rick paused, his hand still on the radio. So, it's a common name. It is, Lily agreed. But there's only one David Chun who owns this chain. And he happens to be my uncle. The store went very, very quiet. Rick's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Nice try. You think I'm going to fall for that? People lie all the time to avoid consequences. I'm not lying, Lily said, and now there was steel in her voice. But I understand why you don't believe me. After all, someone related to the owner wouldn't dress like this, would they? Wouldn't have paint under their nails. Wouldn't look like they don't belong. She pulled her phone out again, scrolling through something while Rick watched, his confidence beginning to crack around the edges. You know what's interesting? Lily continued, speaking to Rick but loud enough for everyone to hear. My uncle built this business on one principle. Treat every customer with respect, regardless of how they look. He grew up poor. He knows what it feels like to be judged, to be dismissed, to be told you don't belong somewhere. Look, if you're really related to Mr. Chun, then you should understand that I'm just protecting the store's interests, Rick said, his tone shifting slightly, less aggressive now but still condescending. We have protocols. Protocols, Lily repeated. Is it protocol to humiliate someone in front of 50 people? Is it protocol to call security on a paying customer who hasn't done anything wrong? A woman near the back of the crowd spoke up suddenly. I'd been standing here for 10 minutes. She didn't do anything except look at phones. He just walked up and started harassing her. Others nodded. Phones were out now, recording. Rick's face flushed red. Everyone needs to mind their own business. This is a private matter between me and this customer. It stopped being private when you made it public, the elderly man in the expensive suit said, his voice carrying authority. I've been shopping here for years, and I've never seen anything like this. You should be ashamed. Rick turned on him. Sir, with all due respect, I'm the manager here, and I make the decisions about who shops in this store. Actually, a voice said from near the entrance, calm and measured, that would be my decision. Every head turned. A man in his late 50s stood near the doorway. He was dressed simply, almost casually, in jeans and a plain shirt, carrying a cup of coffee from the shop next door. His hair was graying at the temples, and he had the kind of face that had earned every wrinkle through hard work and harder decisions. Rick's face went from red to white in an instant. Mr. Chen, he stammered. I didn't know you were coming today. Clearly, David Chen said, walking forward slowly, his eyes taking in the scene. His niece standing in the center of a crowd, phone cameras recording, customers uncomfortable and angry, and his manager looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Lily met her uncle's eyes, and something passed between them. Not triumph, not vindication, just a sad acknowledgement of what had happened. Uncle David, she said softly. Lily. He stopped beside her, looked at the phone she'd been examining, then at Rick. What exactly is going on here? And Rick Thornton, who'd been so confident moments ago, who'd humiliated a customer based on nothing but prejudice and assumptions, suddenly found himself standing in front of the one person who could end his career with a single word. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how this confrontation unfolds, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What happens next will change everything. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the store's aggressive air conditioning. Mr. Chen, I can explain, he began, his voice taking on a tone that probably worked on subordinates but sounded pathetic now. I was simply following standard security procedures. We've had issues with theft in this location, and when I saw someone who fit the profile of previous incidents... Stop, David Chen said quietly. But the single word carried enough weight to silence Rick immediately. Before you dig yourself deeper, I want to hear from my niece. Lily, tell me what happened here. Everything. Lily took a breath. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. Employees from the back room had emerged, sensing something significant unfolding. The teenager who'd been whispering earlier now held her phone up openly, recording. I came in to buy a phone, Lily said simply. The XR12 model, the one I was looking at when Mr. Thornton approached me. I've been saving for 3 months. I brought cash because I read on your website that you offer a discount for cash purchases over $1,000. David nodded, his face unreadable. That's correct. We do. I was comparing specs when he walked up and told me to leave. Said I didn't fit the profile of customers who shop here. Said my hands were unwashed and that he knew my type. Her voice remained steady, but there was an undercurrent of controlled anger. He announced to everyone in the store that I was here to steal something. That's not exactly what I said. Rick interjected desperately. I was just being cautious. You have to understand, Mr. Chen, we've had problems. Just last month, someone tried to walk out with an iPad. The month before that, 3 phones went missing from inventory. I was hired to tighten security, to protect your investment, by accusing paying customers of being thieves? The elderly man in the suit asked sharply. I heard everything, Mr. Chen. Your manager didn't ask this young woman a single question. He took one look at her and decided she was a criminal. Sir, I appreciate your input, but you don't understand the nuances of retail management, Rick said, his desperation making him forget who he was talking to. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, and my instincts said, your instincts are garbage. A young woman's voice cut through. Everyone turned. A girl of about 19, wearing the store's employee uniform, stood near the phone accessories. Her name tag read Jessica, Sales Associate. She was trembling slightly, but her jaw was set. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but I can't stay quiet anymore. David turned his full attention to her. Go ahead, Jessica. Mr. Thornton does this all the time, she said, the words tumbling out now that she'd started. Last week, he followed a black teenager around the store for 20 minutes, insisting the kid was going to steal something. The week before, he told a woman in a hijab that she needed to leave her bag at the counter because people like her made him nervous. He's been reported to HR twice, but nothing ever happens because he's friends with someone in corporate. Rick's face contorted. Jessica, you're fired. Effective immediately. Insubordination. You don't have the authority to fire anyone right now, David said coldly. Keep talking, Jessica. The young woman glanced nervously at Rick, then continued. He calls it visual profiling. He says it's a legitimate security technique. But it's not about security. It's about judging people based on how they look. I've seen him ignore suspicious behavior from well-dressed customers while harassing people who look like they can't afford. Lawyers. This is slander, Rick protested. She's a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind because I wrote her up last month for being late. I was late because my mother was in the hospital. Jessica shot back, tears forming now. And you wrote me up anyway because you said personal problems weren't your concern. David's expression had gone from neutral to something much darker. How long have you worked here, Jessica? 2 years, sir. Sir. Since I started college. And in those 2 years, how many managers have you had? 3, including Mr. Thornton. Did any of the others behave this way? Jessica shook her head. No, sir. The previous managers were strict about sales goals, but they treated everyone with respect. David turned back to Rick, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rick, how many customers have you asked to leave the store in the 3 months you've been managing this location? Rick's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I don't keep exact count. Maybe 5 or 6. Jessica, is that accurate? David asked. No, sir. It's more like 15 or 20. I've lost count. And how many of those customers were actually caught stealing or doing something illegal? Jessica's answer was damning in its simplicity. None, the crowd murmured. Phones continued recording. The mother with 2 children spoke up. I saw him do something similar 2 weeks ago. A young Hispanic man was shopping with his family, and your manager followed them around like they were criminals. They left without buying anything, looking humiliated. David closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Lily saw something in her uncle's face she'd only seen a handful of times in her life. True anger. "Lily," David said quietly, "why are you dressed like this today? And please, be specific." Lily understood what he was doing. Making her humanity visible. Making her real to everyone watching. "I teach art classes at the Riverside Community Center on Saturday mornings. Kids from low-income families mostly. We were doing a project on abstract expressionism, which means lots of paint flying everywhere. I showered and changed after class, but I didn't have time to go home before coming here." "The center is only 2 blocks away. What time did your class end?" David asked. "Noon. I came here at 12:30. And you brought cash because I don't like carrying a balance on credit cards. I've been saving $400 a month from my salary for 3 months. I have exactly $1,247 in my wallet right now." She pulled out an envelope, thick with bills. "I counted it this morning." Rick's face had gone from white to a sickly gray. The story he'd constructed in his head, about a suspicious person who couldn't afford to shop here, was collapsing in real time. "Mr. Chen, I made a mistake," Rick said, his voice cracking. "I apologize to your niece. It was a misunderstanding. Can we please discuss this privately?" "Privately," David repeated slowly. "You humiliated her publicly, but you want to apologize privately. Does that seem fair to you?" Rick had no answer. "Lily works with children," David continued, addressing the crowd now. "She has a master's degree in fine arts from State University. She volunteers 15 hours a week at the community center, teaching kids who can't afford private art lessons. She's been featured in the local newspaper twice for her community work. And today, she saved up 3 months of careful budgeting to buy herself something nice." He turned to face Rick fully. "And you looked at her, saw paint under her fingernails and casual clothes, and decided she was a criminal. Not because of anything she did, not because she acted suspiciously, but because of how she looked." "I was wrong," Rick said desperately. "I admit it. I was wrong. But I've been under a lot of stress. Corporate has been pushing us on theft prevention, and I've been trying to hit certain metrics. And sometimes in retail you have to make quick judgments. Quick judgments based on prejudice aren't judgments," the elderly man in the suit interrupted. "They're discrimination. And in case you're wondering, young man, I'm Harold Weinstein. I sit on the board of 3 major retail chains, and I can tell you definitively that what you did here today would get you fired from any of them within the hour." Rick looked like he might actually be sick. But Lily hadn't spoken for several minutes, and when she finally did, her words carried a weight that made everyone fall silent. "The worst part," she said softly, "isn't that you humiliated me. I'm an adult. I can handle embarrassment. The worst part is that you did this in front of those kids." She pointed to the mother with 2 children. The kids, a girl of about 8 and a boy of maybe 10, were staring at Rick with confused, troubled expressions. Those children just watched an authority figure tell someone that she doesn't belong somewhere because of how she looks. They just learned that it's acceptable to judge people, to demean them, to make them feel small. Lily's voice remained calm, but there was pain underneath it. "Do you understand what you've taught them today, Mr. Thornton? You've taught them that prejudice is normal. That cruelty is acceptable if you have a name tag and a little bit of power." The mother's eyes filled with tears. She put her hands on her children's shoulders protectively. Rick had no response. What could he possibly say? David Chun stood silently for a long moment, looking at his niece, then at Rick, then at the gathered crowd of customers and employees. "Rick, you're suspended pending a full investigation," he said finally. "I want you to leave the premises immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll receive a call from HR within 48 hours. "Mr. Chen, please," Rick begged, all his arrogance gone now, replaced with naked fear. "I need this job. I have a mortgage, car payments. I can't." "You should have thought about that before you abused your position," David said flatly. "Jessica, thank you for speaking up." You showed more integrity in 5 minutes than your manager showed in 3 months. Consider that write-up erased from your file. Jessica nodded, wiping her eyes. Now, David continued, turning to address the entire store. I want to apologize to everyone here today. This is not who we are. This is not what Riverside Luxury Electronics stands for. We were built on the principle that everyone deserves respect. And today we failed spectacularly at that mission. He looked at Lily. Including failing my own niece. Uncle David, Lily said quietly. You didn't fail me. He did. But what none of them knew yet, what would come out in the investigation that followed, was that Rick's behavior was even worse than anyone suspected. The security footage, the complaint reports that had been buried, the pattern of discrimination that went far deeper than a few isolated incidents, all of it was about to surface. And when it did, the consequences would reach much further than one manager losing his job. Security escorted Rick out through the back entrance while customers continued filming. He left behind his name tag on the counter, his keys, and his radio. Within minutes, the videos started appearing online. Manager humiliates customer. Gets caught by owner. Retail worker exposed for discrimination. Store manager suspended after profiling incident. But Lily wasn't thinking about viral videos. She was thinking about Jessica's words. He's been reported to HR twice, but nothing ever happens. David took Lily to his office on the 2nd floor. A space she'd visited many times over the years. Corporate headquarters was across town, but he kept a working office at this flagship location because he believed in staying connected to the actual business of retail. I'm sorry, he said once they were alone. Not just for what happened today, but for not knowing it was happening at all. How could you know? Lily sat down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her steady downstairs was draining away, leaving her shaky and tired. You can't be everywhere. That's not an excuse. David pulled out his phone, making a call. Karen? It's David. I need you to pull every complaint filed about the Riverside location in the last 6 months. Every incident report, every customer complaint, every HR issue. I don't care if it's Saturday. I need it within 2 hours. He hung up and looked at Lily. Karen's our head of HR. If complaints were filed and ignored, she'd find out why. Jessica said Rick was friends with someone in corporate. Lily said slowly. What if those reports never made it to you because someone buried them? David's jaw tightened. Then we have a bigger problem than one bad manager. They spent the next hour going over what had happened, with David taking detailed notes. He called Jessica up to the office, along with 2 other employees who'd witnessed Rick's behavior over the months. A picture began to emerge, one that made Lily's stomach turn. Marcus, a young sales associate who'd been with the company for 18 months, described how Rick would schedule him for the worst shifts whenever customers complained about feeling followed by security. He never said it directly, but I got the message. Me being black made certain customers uncomfortable, and instead of backing me up, he punished me for it. An older employee named Patricia, who worked in inventory, talked about how Rick had accused her of stealing last month. I've been here 7 years. Never had a single issue. But I made the mistake of taking home a damaged tablet that was being written off anyway. Something my previous manager said was fine. Rick called it theft and threatened to press charges unless I resigned. I didn't resign, so he's been making my life miserable ever since. Jessica added more details. He keeps a notebook in his desk. He calls it his watch list. It has descriptions of customers he doesn't want in the store. I saw it once when he asked me to get something from his drawer. It had entries like baggy clothes, probably gang member, and nervous behavior. Likely on drugs. None of it was based on actual suspicious activity, just assumptions. David's expression grew darker with each testimony. This notebook, do you know if it's still in his desk? Unless he took it with him when security walked him out, Jessica said. He was pretty rattled, might have forgotten. David stood up. Let's find out. Rick's office was a small space adjacent to the sales floor. David used his master key to open it, with Lily, Jessica, and the others as witnesses. The desk was messy, papers scattered everywhere, half-empty coffee cups, and a calendar with angry red marks on certain dates. David opened the top drawer. Nothing but pens and notepads. The second drawer held personnel files, which he set aside to review later. The third drawer was locked. He kept that locked all the time, Marcus said. Said it contained confidential company information. David pulled out his phone again. Building security? This is David Chen. I need you to bring bolt cutters to the Riverside manager's office. Yes. Now. While they waited, Karen from HR called back. David, we have a problem. I'm looking at the complaint log for Riverside, and there are 6 formal complaints filed in the last 3 months. All of them regarding Rick Thornton's conduct toward customers or staff, but none of them were escalated to you or to the executive team. Why not? Because they were all marked resolved by someone in my department. But I didn't resolve them, and my 2 senior staff members say they never saw these files. Curran's voice was tight with anger. Someone with access to our system closed these complaints without investigation. Who has that level of access? Only 3 people besides me, you, Thomas Reeves in operations, and, she paused, and Gerald Thornton in compliance. Lily looked up sharply. Thornton, is that Rick's older brother? David said grimly. He's been with the company for 8 years. Solid record, or so I thought. He spoke into the phone again. Karen, I want Gerald Thornton's access revoked immediately. And I want him in my corporate office Monday morning. Don't tell him why. Just say it's a routine meeting. Security arrived with bolt cutters. The locked drawer gave way with a sharp crack. Inside was the notebook Jessica had described, along with something else. A folder labeled Liability Shield. David opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, documented conversations, and what appeared to be insurance paperwork. As he read, his face went from angry to something much worse. What is it? Lily asked. David held up one of the documents. Rick took out a personal liability insurance policy specifically covering discrimination claims. He bought it 2 months ago, right after he started working here. He flipped through more papers. And these emails. He was corresponding with a lawyer about how to document interactions with customers in ways that would protect him legally if accusations were made. So he knew, Jessica said quietly. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he planned for it anyway. Marcus shook his head. That's calculated. That's not just prejudice. That's deliberate. David picked up the notebook, reading entries aloud. Subject: female, mid-20s, ethnic appearance, examining high-end tablets. Advised her that items were out of her price range. She left without incident. That's from 6 weeks ago. He flipped pages. Subject: male, approximately 40, wearing construction clothes. Asked to see smartwatches. Informed him payment plans require credit checks. He became agitated and left. This goes on for pages. He documented everyone he discriminated against, Lily said. But he framed it to make himself look justified. Exactly. And if anyone sued, he'd have his version of events already written down. With insurance to cover legal costs, David set the notebook down carefully. This isn't just one bad manager having a bad day. This is systematic discrimination with premeditation. Patricia spoke up hesitantly. Mr. Chen, there's something else you should know. Rick's been telling employees that the company has quotas for theft prevention. He said corporate wanted us to reduce shrinkage by 15% this quarter, and that if we didn't meet the target, there would be layoffs. We have no such quotas, David said flatly. Shrinkage targets exist, but there's never been a threat of layoffs tied to them. He made that up to justify his behavior. He scared people into going along with him. Jessica added. Some of the younger staff started profiling customers too because they thought their jobs depended on it. He created this whole culture of suspicion. Lily had been quiet, processing everything. Now she spoke, her voice thoughtful. Uncle David, how many other locations do you have? 12 stores across the state. And how many of those stores have you personally visited in the last 6 months? David hesitated. 4, maybe 5. I've been focused on opening the new location in Capital City. So Rick could have been doing this at other stores before he came here. And if his brother was covering for him in HR, there might be dozens of victims we don't know about. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. We need to go wider, Lily said. This isn't just about one store or one manager. If Gerald was bearing complaints, how many other people have been harassed and had their reports ignored? How many customers stopped shopping here because they were treated like criminals? David nodded slowly. You're right. Corinne, are you still on the line? I'm here. Corinne's voice came through the phone speaker. And I'm already pulling complaint records for all 12 locations. If there's a pattern, we'll find it. Good. I want a full audit completed by Monday. Every complaint, every incident, every manager's disciplinary record. If we have a systemic problem, I want to know the scope. He turned to the employees gathered in Rick's office. Thank you for coming forward. I know it wasn't easy, especially when you thought no one was listening. That changes now. Jessica, Marcus, Patricia, I want you to write down everything you remember about Rick's behavior. Dates, specific incidents, anything he said that seemed wrong. We're building a case, and your testimonies matter. After they left, David and Lily sat in his office while he made more calls. Lawyers, board members, the head of corporate communications. Word was already spreading online, and he needed to get ahead of it. But Lily was thinking about something else. She pulled out her own phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she wanted. Rachel Okonkwo, a civil rights attorney she'd met at a community fundraiser last year. She stepped out into the hallway to make the call. Rachel? It's Lily Chun. I need legal advice about a discrimination case. Not for me specifically, but it's complicated. Can we meet tomorrow? Rachel, sharp as ever, caught the urgency in Lily's tone. Tell me what happened. Lily gave her the summary. The humiliation, the notebook, the buried complaints, the insurance policy, the brother in HR. That's not just discrimination, Rachel said when Lily finished. That's conspiracy. If his brother was systematically burying complaints to protect him, you're looking at corporate negligence at minimum, possibly fraud if they knowingly allowed it to continue. Lily, this could be a class action lawsuit. Against my uncle's company. Against the individuals responsible and possibly the company for failing to prevent it. But here's the thing. Your uncle is clearly trying to fix this. If he cooperates fully, documents everything, and takes real action, the company might survive. If he tries to cover it up or minimize it, the whole chain could go under. Lily leaned against the wall, thinking, what if we did something bigger? What if we found every person Rick discriminated against and gave them a platform to tell their stories? Not in court, at least not at first, but publicly. You want to expose this? I want to make sure it never happens again. Not just at my uncle's stores, but anywhere. Rick thought he could get away with this because he had power and insurance and a brother to cover for him. I want everyone to see what happened when he got caught. Rachel was quiet for a moment. That's risky. It'll bring more attention to the company, which means more potential legal liability. But it's the right thing to do. Yes, Rachel agreed. It is. Okay, here's what we do. I'll draft a letter outlining the legal implications and recommending a full transparent investigation. You talk to your uncle about going public with the findings, whatever they are. We offer settlement and support to anyone who is harmed. But we also document this as a case study in what happens when discrimination is systematic. Lily returned to David's office. He was off the phone now, looking exhausted. I talked to a civil rights attorney, Lily said. She thinks this could be a class action lawsuit, but she also thinks we have an opportunity here. What kind of opportunity? To do this right. To find everyone Rick hurt, acknowledge what happened, make it right, and use this as an example. Show other companies what real accountability looks like. David studied his niece for a long moment. That's going to be expensive. And it's going to get ugly. The media will tear us apart. They're already tearing you apart online. At least this way, you control the narrative. He smiled faintly. When did you get so strategic? I teach kids who've been marginalized and ignored their whole lives. I've learned a few things about fighting systems. David made his decision. Okay, we do it your way. Full transparency, real accountability, whatever it takes. What neither of them knew yet was that Rick Thornton, sitting in his apartment, watching his career implode on social media, was about to make a choice that would take this situation from bad to catastrophic. He'd built his insurance policy carefully, documented everything meticulously, and now he was going to use it all to protect himself, even if it meant burning down everything around him. The war was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with a media storm. The videos from Saturday had accumulated over 2 million views across various platforms. Local news vans parked outside Riverside Luxury Electronics. Reporters called David's cell phone every 15 minutes. The hashtag Riverside discrimination was trending nationally, but Rick Thornton wasn't hiding. He was attacking. At 9 a.m., David received an email from a law firm he'd never heard of, Whitmore & Associates. The subject line read, "Notice of intent to sue for wrongful termination and defamation." David read it aloud to Lily and Curran, who'd come to the corporate office for an emergency meeting. Mr. Thornton asserts that he was performing his duties as store manager in accordance with company policy and industry standard security protocols. His suspension without pay constitutes wrongful termination. Furthermore, statements made by Mr. David Chen and store employees to media and on social media constitute defamation of character. Mr. Thornton is prepared to seek damages in excess of $2 million unless this matter is resolved immediately. He's actually suing you, Curran said in disbelief. After everything he did, it's a pressure tactic, Rachel Okonkwo said. She joined them remotely via video conference. He's hoping you'll settle quietly to make this go away. Don't. This is exactly what his insurance policy was designed for, and it tells me he's scared. Should I be worried? David asked. Not if we have evidence, which we do. But Lily, you should know he's named you specifically in the filing. He's claiming you orchestrated a false narrative to damage his reputation, because you were upset about being questioned. Lily felt her stomach drop. He's saying I made this up? He's saying you exaggerated, took things out of context, and used your relationship with the owner to destroy an employee who was just doing his job. It's nonsense, but it's calculated nonsense. He's betting that you'll want to avoid a public legal battle. He's betting wrong, Lily said quietly. By noon, the situation escalated further. Gerald Thornton, Rick's brother, hadn't shown up for his meeting with HR. Instead, his lawyer sent a letter claiming he was being scapegoated for systemic failures in the complaint review process and that he'd been following protocols established by previous HR administrators. He's lying, Curran said flatly. I personally trained him on complaint procedures. He knew exactly what he was doing when he buried those reports. Can you prove it? Rachel asked. I have email chains showing I explicitly told him that any complaint involving potential discrimination needed immediate escalation. He acknowledged receiving those instructions multiple times. Good, print everything. David's phone rang. It was Harold Weinstein, the elderly man from the store who'd witnessed the confrontation. Mr. Chen, I hope you don't mind, but I made some calls. I know people at the Better Business Bureau, the State Retail Commission, and a few journalists who specialize in consumer protection. They're very interested in what happened at your store. That's actually helpful, Mr. Weinstein. Thank you. Call me Harold. And there's something else. I've been shopping at your stores for years, and Saturday wasn't the first time I saw concerning behavior. About 6 months ago, I watched a manager at your downtown location follow a young woman around for 20 minutes. She was Middle Eastern, wearing a headscarf. She didn't steal anything, didn't act suspiciously, but she was treated like a criminal. I didn't say anything at the time, and I regret that now. David closed his eyes. Do you remember which manager? I took a photo of his name tag. Thought I might file a complaint, but I talked myself out of it. Let me send it to you. The photo came through 30 seconds later. The name tag read, Daniel Morrison, store manager. Curran, pull everything we have on Daniel Morrison, David said. By Tuesday afternoon, the scope of the problem had become clear. Curran's audit revealed a disturbing pattern across 7 of the 12 stores. Complaints buried, staff members intimidated into silence, managers who created watch lists, similar to Rick's notebook. And at the center of it all was Gerald Thornton, who'd been systematically protecting certain managers, including his brother.
while allowing them to create hostile environments for both customers and employees. But the worst discovery came from the security footage archives.
Marcus, the young black sales associate from the Riverside store, had mentioned that Rick often reviewed security camera footage obsessively.
David's IT team pulled the logs showing every time Rick accessed the system. What they found was chilling. Rick had been creating compilation videos of customers he deemed suspicious, sorted by race and appearance. Hours of footage showing people browsing, shopping normally, edited together with timestamps and notes. The files were labeled with codes. Profile A, Profile B, Profile C. When IT decoded the system, they realized the profiles corresponded to racial and ethnic categories.
He was building a training database, Rachel said when she saw the evidence.
He planned to use this to teach other managers his profiling system. This isn't just discrimination. This is attempting to institutionalize discrimination. David made a decision.
We're going public with everything. No more waiting for the investigation to finish. People need to know. On Wednesday, David held a press conference at corporate headquarters.
News cameras filled the room. Lily stood beside him, along with Jessica, Marcus, Patricia, and half a dozen other employees and former customers who'd agreed to share their stories. David didn't minimize or deflect.
He laid out exactly what had happened: the systematic discrimination,
the buried complaints, the conspiracy between Rick and Gerald Thornton, the profiling videos, everything.
I built this company on the principle that everyone deserves respect, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I grew up poor. I know what it feels like to walk into a store and be treated like you don't belong. And I am sickened to discover that under my watch, managers were doing exactly that to customers and staff members. He paused, looking directly at the cameras.
Rick Thornton and his brother Gerald betrayed everything this company stands for. They created a culture of fear and discrimination. They hid their actions behind procedures and paperwork.
And they hurt dozens, possibly hundreds of people. Then Lily stepped forward.
If you're watching this story unfold and you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look,
I want you to know that your experience matters. What happened to me wasn't unique.
It was part of a pattern. And the only reason we're here today, exposing this pattern, is because people found the courage to speak up despite being afraid.
She gestured to Jessica, who was crying but standing tall. Jessica risked her job to tell the truth. Marcus endured months of harassment but kept detailed records. Patricia refused to be intimidated into resigning.
These people are the real heroes of this story. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Chen, Rick Thornton's lawyer, has stated that you're using your family connection to unfairly target their client.
How do you respond? Lily's response was calm but devastating.
Mr. Thornton had insurance specifically for discrimination claims before he ever met me.
He kept a notebook documenting people he profiled. He created video compilations categorizing customers by race.
This isn't about me targeting him.
This is about him finally facing consequences for actions he planned meticulously.
Another reporter. Mr. Chen, what happens now to the managers who were involved?
Rick Thornton and Daniel Morrison have been terminated for cause.
3 other managers are suspended pending the completion of individual investigations.
Gerald Thornton has been fired and we're pursuing legal action against him for fraud and conspiracy. We've also retained an outside firm to audit our entire HR complaint process to ensure this never happens again.
What about the victims?
We're establishing a victim support fund. Anyone who experienced discrimination at our stores, whether it was documented or not, can come forward. We'll provide compensation, issue formal apologies, and cover any counseling costs. Additionally, we're creating an independent oversight board that will include community members and civil rights advocates to review our policies and hold us accountable.
A reporter from the back. Isn't this just damage control?
How do we know you won't sweep this under the rug once the cameras leave? David met the question head-on. You don't know that.
You have to watch and hold us accountable.
But I'll tell you this, I'm making all investigation findings public. Every document, every complaint, every piece of evidence. We're not hiding anything because we can't rebuild trust through secrecy. The press conference lasted 90 minutes. By the time it ended,
Social media was exploding with reactions. Some people praised David's transparency. Others said it was too little, too late, but everyone was talking about it. Rick Thornton's lawyer released a statement calling the press conference publicity stunt designed to prejudice potential jurors. But by Thursday morning, 3 more victims had come forward with their own stories, all involving Rick at previous retail jobs before he joined Riverside Electronics. One woman, Teresa Martinez, described how Rick had managed a department store where she worked in 2019. He did the same things there. The profiling, the watch lists, the intimidation. I filed complaints with corporate, but nothing happened. Eventually, I quit because I couldn't take it anymore. A man named James Chen, no relation to David, recounted being followed around a sporting goods store by Rick in 2020. He accused me of stealing a basketball. I'd literally just picked it up off the shelf to check the price. When I complained to the store owner, Rick said I was being overly sensitive and that he was just doing his job. The pattern was undeniable. Rick had been doing this for years, moving from company to company, always staying one step ahead of consequences. Until now. By Friday, Rick's insurance company released a statement saying they were investigating whether his policy covered willful and malicious conduct, or if they could deny coverage based on fraud. His lawyer quietly stopped returning reporters' calls. The lawsuit threat evaporated. Gerald Thornton's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, but David refused. He enabled systematic abuse. He buried complaints from people who trusted the system to protect them. There's no settlement that makes that okay. On Saturday, exactly 1 week after the initial confrontation, David gathered everyone involved at the Riverside store after hours. Employees, victims who'd come forward, community advocates, and media representatives. "We failed you," he said simply. "All of you. And I can't undo that failure. But I can promise you that we're going to do better. We're implementing mandatory bias training for all staff. We're creating clear reporting channels that bypass management. We're hiring a diversity officer who reports directly to me. And we're establishing quarterly community meetings where anyone can voice concerns directly." Jessica spoke next, reading from prepared remarks. "A week ago, I was terrified to speak up. I thought I'd lose my job, that no one would believe me, that nothing would change. But people did believe me. Things did change. And I want other workers in other stores to know that your voice matters. Don't stay silent because you're scared." Then Lily addressed the group. "I came into the store last Saturday to buy a phone. I left with something much more important. The knowledge that speaking up matters, that truth matters. That people who abuse power can be held accountable." She paused, looking around the room. "But this isn't over. Rick and Gerald will face legal consequences, but there are others like them in positions of authority everywhere. The only way to stop them is to keep speaking up, keep documenting, keep refusing to accept discrimination as normal." The room erupted in applause. Later, as people filtered out, Harold Weinstein approached Lily. "My granddaughter is about your age. She's been discriminated against at work but won't speak up because she's afraid. I'm going to show her what you did here. Maybe it'll give her courage." "I hope it does," Lily said. No one should have to accept being treated as less than human. Outside, news vans were packing up. The story was already moving to the next phase. Legal proceedings, corporate reforms, long-term consequences. But for the people who'd lived through it, the real story was simpler. They'd been hurt. They'd spoken up. And for once, someone had listened. 6 months later, Lily walked into Riverside Luxury Electronics carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a confidence that came from something deeper than clothes or titles. The store looked different now. Gone were the sterile white walls and intimidating displays. In their place were open spaces, comfortable seating areas, and large signs in multiple languages reading, "Everyone welcome here." Staff members wore name tags that included their pronouns and a small pin that said, "Safe Space Advocate, Jessica." Now the assistant manager greeted Lily with a genuine smile. "Ready for the presentation?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Lily said. They walked to the community room, a new addition built specifically for events like this. 50 people filled the chairs. Employees from all 12 stores, community leaders, students from local colleges studying business ethics, and several journalists documenting the transformation. David stood at the front, waiting. 6 months had aged him, but there was something lighter in his expression now, as if a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had finally lifted.
"Thank you all for coming," he began. 6 months ago, this company faced its biggest crisis.
Not a financial crisis, though we certainly took a hit. Not a PR crisis, though we're still rebuilding trust.
We faced a moral crisis.
We discovered that the values we claimed to uphold were being violated systematically, and that people we trusted had betrayed that trust.
He gestured to a screen behind him showing statistics. In the 6 months since we went public with our failures, we've seen some interesting numbers.
Customer traffic initially dropped by 32%. Revenue fell by 28%.
We lost 3 major supplier contracts.
Several investors pulled out. The room was silent, attentive, but other numbers tell a different story.
We received over 400 applications for positions we posted, 3 times our usual rate. Employee retention improved by 45%. Customer satisfaction scores, measured by an independent firm, rose from 61% to 87%.
And the customers who shop with us now spend more time in our stores and report feeling more comfortable asking for help. He paused. We're not back to where we were financially.
We may never be.
But we're building something better than what we had. David stepped aside, and Lily took his place at the podium.
My uncle asked me to lead a new initiative, she said. It's called the Community Trust Program. The goal is simple. Make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Not just in these stores, but anywhere we have influence.
She clicked through slides showing the program's components. Mandatory quarterly bias training that actually challenged people's assumptions rather than checking boxes. A hotline that went directly to an independent oversight board, bypassing management entirely. Partnerships with community organizations to hire from populations traditionally locked out of retail careers. And something Lily was particularly proud of, a scholarship fund for young people pursuing careers in business ethics and civil rights law.
We're funding this scholarship with money that would have gone to legal settlements if we'd chosen to
fight our victims in court, Lily explained.
Instead, we acknowledged harm, compensated people fairly,
and directed additional resources toward preventing future harm. The first 5 scholarships were awarded last month.
One of the recipients is here today.
A young woman in the second row stood up. Her name was Asha, and she'd been one of the customers Rick had profiled and humiliated 2 years ago at a different store.
I dropped out of college after that incident, Aisha said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion.
I was already struggling financially, and being accused of stealing in front of everyone destroyed what little confidence I had left. I felt like the world was telling me I didn't deserve to be in spaces with nice things. She looked at Lily. When I heard about what happened here, when I saw someone actually hold these people accountable, something changed. I reached out to the Victim Support Fund, not because I wanted money, but because I needed to know someone believed me. And they did. They apologized. They listened. And then they offered me a scholarship to finish my degree. Asha smiled, tears on her cheeks. I'm studying business law now.
My goal is to work in corporate compliance, making sure companies actually follow through on their diversity and inclusion promises. Because of what Lily and Mr. Chen did here, I have a future again. The room erupted in applause. After the presentation, Lily mingled with attendees.
Harold Weinstein approached with his granddaughter, a woman in her late 20s who introduced herself as Rebecca.
I filed a discrimination complaint at my job last month, Rebecca said. It was terrifying.
But I thought about what you did, how you didn't run when that manager tried to humiliate you.
My complaint was investigated properly, and the supervisor who was harassing me got suspended.
I don't know if I would have had the courage without your example.
You had the courage all along, Lily said. You just needed to see that using it was worth the risk.
Marcus walked over, and Lily barely recognized him. He'd been promoted to manager of the downtown location, the same store where Daniel Morrison had created his own discrimination system.
We had our best quarter ever, Marcus said proudly.
Turns out when you treat people with respect, they actually want to shop with you. Revolutionary concept. Patricia, the inventory specialist Rick had accused of theft, had been promoted to operations supervisor overseeing 3 locations. I'm implementing new inventory protocols that make it impossible for managers to falsely accuse staff of stealing, she explained. Every item is tracked digitally, and any discrepancies trigger automatic reviews by multiple people, not just one manager's word against an employee's. David joined them, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Lily. Your mother called. She's very proud of you, by the way. Told me I should give you a raise. Lily laughed. I don't work for you, Uncle David. I know, but I'd like to change that. We need a director of community relations and ethics. Someone who understands what we're trying to build and has the credibility to make it real. Interested? Lily considered. She loved teaching art to kids at the community center, but this was an opportunity to create change on a larger scale. Can I do both? Keep teaching and take this position? We'll make it work. What they didn't discuss in that public moment was what had happened to Rick and Gerald Thornton. That story had played out more quietly, but no less completely. Rick's lawsuit had collapsed when his own insurance company declined coverage, citing evidence that he'd knowingly engaged in discriminatory practices and attempted to hide them. Without insurance backing him, he couldn't afford the legal fees to continue. He'd withdrawn the suit and disappeared from public view. His reputation in retail was destroyed. A simple Google search of his name returned pages of articles about the discrimination scandal. He'd applied to over 60 jobs in 6 months and received 0 offers. His mortgage had gone into foreclosure. His car had been repossessed. The last anyone heard, he was working overnight shifts at a warehouse, the kind of job he'd once looked down on. Gerald had faced criminal charges for fraud and obstruction of justice. He'd pled guilty to reduced charges and received 2 years probation, a $50,000 fine, and permanent disqualification from working in HR or compliance roles. His lawyer had tried to paint him as a loyal brother who'd made mistakes, but the evidence of systematic corruption was too extensive. Both brothers had lost everything they'd valued: power, status, financial security, and respect. Not because Lily had destroyed them, but because they destroyed themselves through their own cruelty and arrogance. As the event wound down, a reporter from the local paper approached Lily for a final comment. 6 months ago, you were humiliated in front of 50 people. Now you're being held up as an example of courage and integrity. How does that feel? Lily thought carefully before answering. 6 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was being embarrassed. I thought having people see me at my most vulnerable was the end of something. But it turned out to be the beginning. The beginning of what? Of understanding that vulnerability isn't weakness. That speaking truth to power isn't about destroying the powerful. It's about protecting the powerless. That manager wanted to humiliate me to prove I didn't belong in his store. Instead, he proved that people like him don't belong in positions of authority. The reporter scribbled notes. Do you consider this revenge? No, Lily said firmly. Revenge would have been trying to hurt him the way he hurt me. This is justice. Justice means creating a world where what he did becomes impossible. Not just getting even. Later that evening, Lily returned to the community center for her Saturday art class. The kids were working on a mural about moments that changed us. One girl, about 10 years old, was painting a scene of someone standing up to a bully. Is that based on something that happened to you? Lily asked gently. The girl nodded. My mom showed me a video of you. The lady who took the microphone when the mean man tried to make you leave. She said, if you could be brave, I could be brave too. So when a boy in my class was being mean to my friend, I told the teacher instead of staying quiet. Lily felt something warm spread through her chest. This was why it mattered. Not the press conferences or the policy changes, important as those were. It mattered because a 10-year-old girl had learned that her voice mattered, that speaking up was possible, that she didn't have to accept cruelty as normal. That night, Lily sat in her apartment, the same modest one-bedroom she'd lived in for 3 years, and reflected on everything that had changed. She'd received job offers from major corporations impressed by her handling of the situation. She'd been invited to speak at conferences about ethics and accountability.
She'd been featured in business magazines as an example of the new generation of corporate leadership. But the offer she'd accepted
was the one from her uncle, because it meant staying connected to the actual work of change rather than just talking about it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Just handled my first difficult customer situation as assistant manager. Remembered what you said about treating people's dignity as non-negotiable. Turned a complaint into a loyal customer.
Thank you for showing us a better way. Lily smiled and typed back. You did that yourself.
I just reminded you that you could. She thought about Rick Thornton, wherever he was now. Probably bitter and convinced he'd been wronged. She didn't hate him.
She almost felt sorry for him. He'd had power and wasted it on cruelty. He'd had opportunities and squandered them on prejudice. He'd built his life on making others feel small. And when that foundation collapsed, he'd had nothing left to stand on. The best revenge, Lily had learned, wasn't destroying your enemies.
It was building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so transformative that their cruelty became irrelevant. It was turning your worst moment into someone else's inspiration.
It was refusing to let being torn down stop you from lifting others up. 6 months ago, a manager had tried to humiliate her for not looking like she belonged.
Today, she'd helped create a space where everyone belonged. That wasn't revenge. That was victory. And for those watching this journey, wondering if speaking up is worth the risk, remember this. Silence protects perpetrators, but your voice protects everyone who comes after you.
The courage you show today becomes someone else's courage tomorrow.
If this story inspired you or made you think differently about standing up for what's right, subscribe to see more stories about people who refuse to stay silent and change the world because of it.